Welcome to the Value Stuff Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Glazier. I'm a personal property appraiser and I value stuff for a living. So today I want to talk about something it's been on my mind for a long time, and I'm trying to think of, like, how do I go about this? And I want to talk about how we can prevent our families from fighting and not getting along after we die. And one of the biggest things that families are fighting about, it's what I deal with. They're fighting over this stuff. They're fighting over the furniture, the artwork, the jewelry, the collectibles. Like, it goes on and on and on, but they're fighting over the personal possessions, the personal property. I put a lot of thought into it. Why is there so much going on? And it's an onion, like, to unpack it and stuff. When there's very little planning, people have put very, very little planning in general into what to do with their stuff after they die. And before they die, they don't do the plan. There's no plan. There's very little thought that's gone into what's going to happen with all my stuff. I see it all the time. Families fighting, not getting along, the dysfunction. It's even ended up in legal battle. I've even seen where a whole house has to be packed up, the whole house packed up, put in storage, and it's been there for months and sometimes years because the family was fighting and not getting along. And the biggest reason for this is there was no plan made, and there was very little thought that's gone into it, and this plan was not put into the will. So once, when someone dies and someone passes on, families are very fragile. It's probably the most fragile point of a family and history. And we do, you hear this thrown out all the time. Let's create a legacy. If your family's not going to get along and not fight, I don't see how there's a legacy there. Instead of landmines, let's create legacies. So how do we create legacies? One of the most important things is to have a plan for your stuff before you die. So when after you die, your family isn't being torn and ripped apart. How do we do this? I've come up with 6 steps. And if you follow these 6 steps, it's going to make life so much easier for your family after we pass. Like, I want to talk a little bit about the legacy. People think, a legacy is your name on the side of a building, or, maybe you built up a big company, or, family wealth, and, all that stuff is really important. But when I look at a legacy, I look at, are you leaving your family in a great position to succeed and succeed as a family? Yes, we're dealing with so many different personalities, and not everyone's going to, be friends and always get along, but we don't want to make it worse because, like I said, when people are grieving, and it's probably the most fragile point, with a family. So if you have a plan of what to do with your stuff before you die, after you die, we can get this legacy, rolling. So here's my 6-step plan. So step number 1, and we're talking about all your stuff, all your possessions, all the things that you own. Number 1 is you need to make a list, and I suggest you get a binder and, with paper in there so you can keep adding to it and taking things out. So I would get a binder with some paper, and I would list, we're going to have 3 categories. There's an A, a B, and a C. So category A is list your most valuable items that you think are the most valuable. It doesn't have to be, there's thousands of items in every household. We don't need to list 1,000 items, but we just want to list maybe the top 10, top 20, top 30, the most valuable items. That's going to be in list A. And when you do this list, make sure you have, like, there's space so you can add some information after you've made the list. So we're going to make a list. List A, that is all the most valuable items. List B. So list B is going to be your family heirlooms. These are things that have been passed down from generation to generation, and they might be very valuable. So they might already be listed on, list A, which is fine, because then you don't have to list them. But we want to make sure the important thing here is to capture all the, important things in our estate that's going to be in our estate. So list A, all the valuable. List B, the family heirlooms. These are items that have been passed down, and these are items you'd like to go to your loved ones, to your family members. And the reason we want to, we're doing this list too, is I've seen a lot of really important stuff to people end up in a landfill or donated just because people didn't know what they were and didn't know anything about them. So that's list A. List B. List C is sentimental items. And these items could already be included in list A or list B, but this is to make sure we're not missing anything. So list C is all our sentimental items. And sentimental items are, they might not have a lot of monetary value, but they definitely have sentimental value because, you care about these things. They mean a lot to you, and you want to make sure that they're not just, it's not just something that's sold in a sale for $5 or $2 or given away or put in landfills. I can't tell you how much stuff ends up in landfills. That's A, B, and C. That's our list. That's step number one. We want to have a list. We want to capture. And this list it's not going to be thousands of items. Once you put a lot of thought into this, you're probably anywhere from, it could be from 10 items, maybe up to 50. If you have a huge, estate, it could be hundreds of items. But I would say most are between 10 to say 50 items at the most. And that's going to be A, B, and C. That's step one. Step two is, now that you have all this information, you have it written down in a binder, and make sure that there's space between them all. Any information that you can put about the items. And let me give you an example. If it's a family heirloom, your rest of your family might not know that this belonged to a grandmother in Scotland, or, it could have been something they got when they lived in India. If they knew the history of it, they would care about it. You want to make sure any information you have, that's the history of the items. You also want to put price if you bought it, or you remember, maybe your mother or grandfather, somebody bought it. Put any price, any information that would be pertinent, put down. So price, origin, where you got it from. You might have bought it at an auction somewhere. Put all that information and make sure you're putting it under that. So we have that. So that's step two, is any important information, including price, where you got it. You might put a little notes in there too. So that is step number two. Step number three, and this is where, now that you've got your list down, and this is an exercise for you too. It's not something you're going to do in like a day or an hour or something. It's probably something you do over a few weeks. But, you've got the information, you got it there, you got it in a nice binder. You are going to call someone like myself in. You are going to call a certified personal property appraiser in. And the reason you're going to do that, it's important that we know what the real values are, and also the appraiser is going to do additional research, is going to give you like fair market values. That's when we're dealing with an estate, we're dealing with fair market values, give you the current fair market values. And then there's going to be photos. That way you're going to have a nice organized report. You're going to have an actual appraisal report of these items. So you're still going to have your list, the binder with all your handwritten notes and stuff, but you're also going to let the appraiser, you're going to go around with the appraiser and say, okay, this is going to be item one, this will be item two, and then you're going to tell the appraiser all the information you have. And then a good appraiser should probably even find out some more information for you, to do some research, so you even have more information. Got an appraisal report. Once the appraiser comes to do all this, you'll have your appraisal report in hand about a week to 2 weeks after this process. It just depends how busy the appraisers are, but a nice report. Step four, okay, now that you've got all this information, you've made the list of all the important stuff, including, the valuable stuff, the sentimental stuff, the family heirlooms, and you've put all the information in there. And now you have an appraisal report. Now you can decide what is actually going to happen with these items. Like who's going to get what? Maybe you want to donate a lot of the items. Maybe you want to start giving away some of the items before you pass away. I love that, because if it's something that you don't use anymore or need, but you got a family member would really want this and stuff, why not give it away while you're alive? Gift it. That's just the reason you were doing all this. It's to make life easier for our family after we pass away. But it's very important to have a plan for all our personal stuff. And by doing, step 1, 2, 3, we now we're understanding our own stuff more. We're understanding what's valuable, what doesn't have a lot of value, but what is more sentimental. Now we can start deciding who gets what gets donated. This is a great exercise because you might look at, you might have one thing. Let's just say you have a Rolex watch. 5 family members are going to want your Rolex watch. You might put in that, instead of giving it to a family member because they're going to argue and fight over it and have hard feelings, you might then decide, like, no, when I pass away, this will be sold, and just divide the money up, as opposed to one person getting it and the other people being upset. This is all what the important thing about all this stuff is. You're the one making the decision about what happens with your stuff. You're doing it while you're alive. So when you pass away, there's a plan in place. People pass on, and all of a sudden, in a relatively short time, people are grieving and they're like, okay, what are we going to do all this stuff? And it's overwhelming. But if there's a nice plan in place, you're going to save a lot of that. So let me move on to step number 5. So step number 5, we talked about all that stuff. Step number 5, this plan now has to be put in your will. What do I mean by in your will? You're going to include the appraisal report in the will, or in the files with it at least. So we know there's photos there. We know what we're talking about, but you're going to list those items. And there could, the 100 items, say there's 100 items. At this point, it's probably down to about 30. You've probably given away a bunch of items already. You might decide, okay, yeah, that's a family heirloom, but nobody's going to want that big buffet and hutch. That can be sold. That's fine. But you want to include this plan in your will. Very, very important. And it's so the stuff that's also not, you're going to list the most important stuff in there, but you also want to have some kind of plan, like the rest goes to charity, or the rest, there's an estate sale. With this exercise, you're in control before you pass away. And by being in control when you pass away, this is going to help out your executor or executors, because you have a plan. They're like, no, these were my wishes, or the person that's deceased's wishes. These were the wishes. So it's very simple, very laid out, nice and neat. It's never perfect. No estate is perfect, but I'm telling you, the ones that I deal with, that there's very little friction and very little family strife, it's because there was a lot of planning that went on ahead of time. And I don't just, again, like, I don't just mean about, the finances, or, what I mean, or who gets what. I mean, as far as the big ticket items, I'm talking about when there's been a nice plan of what to deal with all this stuff. Because again, the household items, thousands of items, right? But they're going to fight over the most important items. Okay. And again, the most important items might not be the most valuable, but they're the sentimental family heirlooms. And sometimes they could be, money's always important. That's why we have to list the most valuable items too, because people will want the most valuable items. If there's one painting worth $20,000, I guarantee you're going to have 5 or 6 family members that will want that painting. Not so much because of the painting itself, but because it's worth $20,000. That was step 5. Step 6 is, and you might do step 6 before you do step 5. And step 6 is, you want to have discussions with the executors and your beneficiaries, the people that are going to get this stuff. I can't tell you how many times people don't even know they were an executor for an estate, or the will comes and people are surprised, I can't believe that, or people have inherited a bunch of stuff that they don't want. If you had had that discussion prior to your passing, then you would know, like, they don't want the china set, but maybe another person in the family might want the china set. So that's important to have those discussions. Some advice with these discussions: I wouldn't have a big family get together and talk about it. I'd kind of do this a one-on-one, things, and you would say things like, what would be the 5 things when I pass, what are the 5 things that, you'd want? And just give an idea. And then you could, that gives you an idea, but you need to have these family discussions about your estate. Oh man, I can't tell you how many people don't have them. And about an estate in general. I'm specifically talking about the stuff, the personal property and stuff. But by doing this exercise too, it's just going to make things a lot clearer. And you might have a bunch of stuff now that you're looking at because you've done this exercise and you're like, oh my God, I've got way too much stuff. I don't want to burden my family with it. So let's donate it or sell a bunch of this stuff now. By doing this exercise before you, it's not just about, dying with thousands of items. You might get rid of half the stuff you have just because you realize you're doing an inventory. You're also doing inventory of your memories. You're doing an inventory of your life. And we all want to leave a family legacy, and we do. I really believe, I think most people are not kind, and most people, they don't want fighting. I'm in the trenches. When I'm dealing with the stuff, I'm in the trenches. I've also dealt with over 500 estates. I've seen, you never see everything. I'm surprised every week when I'm doing appraisals and dealing with families and stuff. But you see patterns. And the patterns are nice, organized estate planning just saves the family so much fighting and not getting along. I know I keep going over that, the dysfunction, not getting along, but we have to, it's like an epidemic that nobody's talking about how the most difficult part in most estates is dealing with the stuff. And that's what I'm trying to help eliminate here is let's leave our family in a better place and leave our family happy and getting along as opposed to fighting and being torn apart. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's near and dear to my heart. This is to be continued because I'm working on a book about all this stuff, and I'm working on a talk, like a keynote speaking talk about all this stuff because it's not really, I've gone through this stuff quickly. You can go into more depth on what's a family heirloom, what's a sentimental value, what's your valuables. I can go into much more depth on all this stuff. And I'm going to create a workbook for this to make it easy. I know right now we're going to write it down in a binder, but I want to create a workbook to help people out. So thank you so much. Let's save families. Let's save families. I'm Dan Glazier. This is the Value of Stuff podcast. Please share, like, subscribe so we can grow this. Thank you so much. Everybody just have the most wonderful day. Thank you for listening.